Right. Good virtual afternoon, everyone. Uh, just by way of introduction, my name's Dirk Wallace. I'm based over the hill in Hamilton, and I work as a senior researcher for FAR. No doubt you've seen me at events in the past, but if you haven't, um, wanted to introduce myself virtually at least. Today, I really want to talk through something that's pretty exciting for me. It's around how you can reduce your input costs in a maize system, and specifically how you can reduce your nitrogen fertilizer input costs. So I want to talk through what we've learned from research and what you could take away to try on farm to try to lift profits this growing season. So when it comes to maximizing margins and thinking about how we can get better returns off the fertilizer we're paying for, I tend to think about a few things. The first thing is the size of the prize, and that's that we know over the last 3 years, fertilizers accounted for up to 37% of the expenses of establishing maize. We also know that profit's a pretty simple equation. And as researchers, we have not much control over the amount you'll get paid for your product you're producing, but we can look at ways that you can reduce your costs. And that's where the expense part comes in. So over the last 5 years, I've been looking at ways that we can use understanding of different nitrogen sources to reduce nitrogen costs on farm. And that's really what I want to focus on today. The reason is that we know we need nitrogen. Maize plants need plenty of it. And I often think that if you asked an accountant how to save money on nitrogen, they'd probably just tell you to buy less of it or look for a cheaper source. It's not that easy in our systems, but we're still really interested in how we can reduce that cost to lift profits. So where we often land is whether we can get that nitrogen from somewhere else. And by somewhere else, I don't mean moving from a blue fertilizer company to a green fertilizer company. I mean looking at nitrogen that we might just have in our system that we could take advantage of to lift profits. Right, so enter soil nitrogen supply, and this is an area where I get particularly excited, so hopefully I'll stay on track here. But just to explain it at the start, soil nitrogen supply is a natural process. It's the conversion of non-plant available nitrogen into plant available nitrogen, and it's a biological system. So anyone sitting in the audience that grows crops, you'll already be an expert in this. We get more nitrogen humming out of the soil when the conditions are warm and moist, just like plants do better in those conditions. And when it's cold and dry, the amount of nitrogen supplied from the soil tends to reduce. Now, there's two parts that we measure around soil nitrogen supply. The first is a measurement of what you've got, and that's called mineral nitrogen. In the past, it's been called deep nitrogen as well. And that's really just a snapshot of what's in your system below ground right now. And that's always going to be a balance of what's been taken up by plants and what's come available out of the various sources in the soil. The next part that we can measure is an estimate of what you'll get. And this has actually seen a lot of research investment over the last few years. And we've got a new test called the potentially mineralizable N test, which can be used to estimate monthly release of N from any given soil. So this is really nice. It actually allows you to have a bit of a forecast of what amount of nitrogen your crop will see over the growing season. So what we can do with those two tests now is actually add them together. So you can take a measure of what you've got and a measure of what you'll get and actually put them together into something that I like to call soil nitrogen supply. Rolls off the tongue a lot easier than mineral N plus mineralizable N. So I like simple. So often when I talk about soil nitrogen supply, the first question I'll get back is where does that N actually come from? it often can sound a little bit too good to be true. So I just want to talk through some basics of soil nitrogen here. It won't take too long, so bear with me. In the top foot of soil, funnily enough, you've actually got 10 tons typically of nitrogen. So that's just to 30 centimeters, very shallow. Um, the thing is that nitrogen is largely in a non-plant available form. And so what we're talking about really is the conversion of that non-plant available form to a plant available form. So in terms of that proportion that we get each year, over the last 4 to 5 years, we've been tracking this at our research site, and we're measuring around about 150 kilograms of N per hectare per year, which is about 1.5% of that total. And also each year when we grow a crop, we're actually returning nitrogen in the roots and the stover, and in maize grain systems, those returns are actually quite significant too. So it actually goes to show that we're only taking advantage of a small part of nitrogen that's naturally occurring, and it's relatively insignificant compared to the bigger pool of nitrogen that we've got floating around in the soil. So the question we have as researchers is, what happens if we use that soil nitrogen? Can we use it to lift profits on farm? And can we use this new research understanding to actually make an economic difference? So to test that, we've tested 3 different nitrogen decisions in a maize crop in the Waikato. The first one is where we basically feed the crop its full nitrogen requirement as nitrogen fertilizer. So if we're targeting a 22-ton crop, we multiply that 22 tons by 12 kgs of N per ton of dry matter to get its full N requirement. The next approach is that we take some soil samples to 30 centimeters prior to planting and just tick the mineral nitrogen box, which is that measure of what you've got in the ground. We then subtract that off the total crops requirement and use that as a guide to make our fertilizer decision. The third approach that I want to talk about today is one that we've made measurements on, and that's where we look at, again, soil sampling to 30 centimeters before planting, but the additional step is we tick 2 boxes. So we tick a box for soil mineral nitrogen and one for potentially mineralizable nitrogen. We can get both test results off that same sample, and when we add them together, that was that soil nitrogen supply term. So 3 different decisions, and what I want to talk through next is how they affect yield and profitability over 4 years. So here's a picture of me looking particularly positive out in the field, but luckily I'm just a bit of a reference for the height of the maize. And these are 2 of our plots where the one on the left is our full nitrogen treatment, the one on the right is the full nitrogen treatment minus the soil N supply. So briefly, the results we've been seeing is that over the 4 years of this 5-year trial, we've kept all of our decisions in the same place. This is all done at our Waikato research site. It's a low-end site. When we measure soil mineral nitrogen early in the season, there's about 20 kilos of N per hectare to 30 centimeters depth. And what we found over the 4 years is we've had no difference in yield between those 2 decisions. So either using the full N rate or subtracting soil N supply. We've seen no change in soil carbon between those decisions. And importantly, we've actually seen the post-maize harvest soil mineral N reduce by between 28 to 75%. And that's important because the N left after the maize comes out is at risk of loss. And this is particularly important in summer maize grain and winter fallow systems. So you're reducing your risk of winter losses. And that loss has a environmental impact, but it also has an economic one. You've paid for that nitrogen, so you don't want to lose it. But ultimately, what did we save in terms of dollars? Well, let's make it nice and simple. Um, if we just use the mineral nitrogen result, um, we were able to save $105 compared to using our full N approach per hectare. And these are averages generated over that 4-year period. So long-term data, relatively long-term. If we include the estimate of mineralization or full soil nitrogen supply, the amount of dollars saved compared to our full N approach goes up to 243. So from this, we're seeing real value in including an estimate of nitrogen supply over the growing season. Those numbers in different terms are up to 45% reduction in cost when we use soil nitrogen supply, and it's a 20% reduction in cost when we just use mineral nitrogen. And all of these tests were done in September prior to planting maize to a 30 centimetre depth. And I just want to make a note that although I've presented information here where we subtract that mineral N value, that wasn't actually a treatment in the trial, but we're able to look at the results because we've measured multiple things. One of the other questions I tend to get when discussing this topic is around depth of measurement. The current advice actually is that if you can manage the top foot in terms of soil nitrogen, you're on the right track. And I'd add to that monitoring the rest of the soil profile will allow you to understand how your management's going. So occasionally collecting a 60 centimetre sample is going to be really good for you calibrating your own mind and your own decisions. In terms of our research site, we actually saw a relatively small advantage to going deeper. So if we measured to 60 centimeters at V4 instead of measuring prior to planting, then we could save between $30 and $50 per hectare additionally. So there is more money to be made there, but it does depend on the site itself. So next up, I just really want to talk through how to get started yourself, and yeah, how you can give this a go if you're interested. So the first step is to ask the soil. This is relatively simple. You can either get some support from a local rep or you can actually do this yourself. So a soil sampler may be one of the cheapest pieces of precision ag gear you could buy. They're around about $100 and it gives you complete flexibility about when you do your sampling and where. Once you've got that, all you really need is a chili bin and some lab request forms and bags. Those are all freely available from labs. They can even supply you with chili bins too. So once you've got your soil ready to roll and you've got your results back from the lab, we've actually got a soil nitrogen supply calculator we've built on the FAR website. You can take that information that you get back from the lab and turn it into something useful, which is kgs of N per hectare. And this will spit out your monthly estimate of how much N you'll get too. So quite a useful tool. And by all means, we're a friendly bunch at FAR, so just give us a call if you want a run through of this approach. We've also produced a booklet. Hopefully there's a few of these floating around at the event. If there isn't, again, just get in touch and we can get something out to you. But it goes into a lot more detail than I've got time to do today, but great to know that that's there. So once you've got your soil numbers back, the next part is to calibrate them on farm by asking the crop how much nitrogen the soil really is pumping out. And over the last 5 years, we've actually been really lucky to work alongside different groups of growers that are giving this a go. And I wanted to provide one example here of a grower who had been through the soil testing process and worked his way up to running a no nitrogen strip in his system, just to understand how close the soil test was. And last season, from this strip, he managed to measure 22.6 tons of dry matter per hectare as silage yield. And from his strip where he did his standard practice, he achieved 23.8 tons of dry matter per hectare. So as you can imagine, as a grower, that's really powerful. That is more nitrogen than his soil test predicted, and consistently across the board, we tend to see that result. So the soil test itself can often under-predict how much nitrogen you'll really get. So by combining the research with your actual own on-farm observation and ability to grow crops, you'll actually end up with the best result as to how to use these tools. So to summarize, we know nitrogen fertilizer is a major expense in maize systems, so we really want to know how to reduce the cost to lift profits. From our research, we know that using soil nitrogen supply can reduce annual nitrogen input costs by up to $243 a hectare. So there's a real dollar saving there of applying this research on farm. And the third piece is results will always vary. And the best way to understand how to utilize these tests in your operation is to try it out and calibrate it on farm and build your own knowledge of how to apply this. Thank you very much for listening along. And by all means, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly or